Hello and welcome to Save Your Sanity bonus live stream. I'm Dr. Rhoberta Shaler. My guest today is Jennifer Lair. How could I do that? I do know someone called Janet Lair. My guest is Jennifer Lair, and you can learn more about her here at weconcile.com. We're going to be talking about attachment styles, and this is a really important thing for us to be having a conversation about. If you enjoy these broadcasts, please feel free to become a patron. And you do that by going to patreon.com/saveyoursanity. You make a pledge over there, a one-time donation or a pledge of $1, $5 a month, and that helps us keep the programming going and pay the costs of doing this. So if you're finding value from these things, please do that. That's always a good idea. So, Jennifer, I am going to ask you to introduce yourself to everybody.
So my name is Jennifer Lair, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I have specialized in couples, and I've written and created a couples educational program called WeConcile, WeConcile. And I do a lot of writing on relationships, and I do guest on a lot of podcasts. So I'm happy to be here.
I'm happy you are too. Jennifer's going to be my guest on Save Your Sanity podcast in about 3 weeks. And so we will have an in-depth dive into other parts of this conversation. But I just wanted to introduce you to her and become familiar with the work so that you could look forward to the podcast. And we're going to be talking about how attachment styles play into relationship dynamics, whether those relationships are toxic or not. And you may have heard about attachment styles. It's much more common to hear about that than it ever has been these days, but you may not understand the impact of that. And I wanted to talk about that today. What do we really mean when we're talking about an attachment style? Let's start with that part of the conversation.
So when we talk about attachment styles, we're talking about the way we start with infants, babies, and the way infants learn to keep their caregivers close. And then that translates into romantic relationships and intimate relationships where we've been hardwired to respond certain ways. Often in the stress of a relationship, it comes up strongly. And it's important because the more you know about attachment, the more you can understand what's happening between you and your partner in terms of why you're reacting to each other the way you are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would add to that conversation when you actually take a look at what your attachment style may be, and this is not a cosmopolitan quick checklist, but when you really dive into finding out where did I get my attachment style, what is it, what caused it, what were the dynamics and things, as Jennifer says, it will predicate a lot on how you will behave in primary relationships in your life, particularly in that all-important romantic one. So we want to talk about what these attachment styles are and where they come from. So now you know that it is a bonding. It's a bonding or lack of bonding with a primary caregiver is a very fundamental way that these arrive in our lives. And let's just talk about what is it so basic to know how we form relationships? Why is it that way?
So we're mammals, and mammals mean we need to be nurtured and, held and gazed at and attended to. And we need to survive. We don't survive unless we're being nurtured by our parents. And parents are, do the best job they can, but sometimes they miss the mark a little bit. And I can give you maybe an example of, let's suppose you had a parent that really struggled with your feelings and sort of dismissed your feelings. Well, that's going to create anxiety for you, and you're not going to know quite how do I be with this person who I need? And if I have a feeling they're mad or they have a reaction, you get rid of your feelings. So it's that kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, and another example would be that here you are, born, just got here in this world, and they don't seem to be paying any attention to you. They don't seem to care. You can cry, you can not cry, you can laugh, you can smile, you can do whatever, and they don't seem to care. And that's a big revelation for a baby. Not that they have the words for it, but they have this visceral thing that happens in their body to say, I don't matter. I can't get their attention. Am I really here? Do I, am I supposed to be here? We start asking very basic questions without language, of course, and baby talk in our head, I guess. But we start responding in that way to, how am I received in this world? And how am I safe? And attachment styles are things that we start to calibrate very young. And so it's important for us to realize, sometimes I'll work with someone, as I'm sure you have, Jennifer, who wasn't wanted. They've been told many, many times they just weren't wanted. My mother used to tell me regularly, I'm an only child for a reason. My mother used to tell me regularly, I didn't want kids.
Wow.
Right? So, that basic message. Now, what she tried to say was, but we're really glad you're here. But the basic message was, I didn't want children and I didn't want to be pregnant, and get that. Right?
Right.
And so that kind of message is transmitted in the prenatal environment. It is transmitted in the chemicals that wash over the baby in the womb. All kinds of things are happening. And then you show up and they're like really wonderful to you in front of other people, like, because you're supposed to be happy you have this baby. And then when you're at home, like, oh, it's crying. I wanted to do something else and it's crying. And when we start to look at as basic dynamics as that, we start to be at the beginning of forming an attachment style. So let's talk about what those attachment styles are, because can you recognize it in yourself? Can you recognize your own attachment style, or do you need someone to diagnose this? What's your opinion of that?
Well, first of all, there's a ton of quizzes out there that you can take and learn your attachment style. And interestingly enough, different people have named the attachments styles somewhat differently. And some of them are really descriptive, like Stan Tatkin says you can be an anchor, an island, or a wave. Sue Johnson says you can be a pursuer or a withdrawer. Then there's, so there's these names that are descriptive, which is helpful, because if you get into the words, there's the dismissive, which is also the avoidant. There's the preoccupied, which is also the ambivalent. There's the fearful, which is also the disorganized, among other names. And so it's better to conceptually understand what it means in terms of your behavior and where your triggers are, rather than, being too attached to the name. But the one that Rhoberta just described a minute ago, before she got into her story about her childhood, sounded to me like an ambivalent, anxious, preoccupied, which is someone who's going to be, they're insecure, like, nobody wants me. What can I grab onto to feel okay? So that would be the wave in Stan Tatkin and the pursuer in Sue Johnson, which are both major couples modalities, emotionally focused therapy and psychobiological approach to couples therapy. And then there's also, the island is the one who gets rid of the feelings because the feelings weren't accepted. That's the island. It's the dismissive. And so what happens when you get an island together with a wave? Well, you've got one chasing the other, and one withdrawing and one pursuing. So it's understanding the dynamics that happen because of how you're both wired.
Well, you just jumped right into the real meat of the issue here, because if you have one person who says, I'm really happy to be here and everybody has always validated my existence, and you get hooked up with somebody who's saying, I really need somebody to really need me because nobody's ever wanted me before, and you get into an imbalanced dynamic, you can have a lot of problems.
Right.
And so if somebody's avoidant and they say they love you, but they never want to talk to you, or they get involved in that, what I call in the hijackal world, my world of toxic relationships, I call these people hijackals, but hijackals will have situations where um, you want to tell them about your feelings or how you feel, you want to discuss an issue, or you want to go deeply into how you felt about it, and they're like, who cares?
Right,
Right.
right. Yeah, it's hard to get them to emotionally connect after, the fireworks of falling in love die down. It's just not where they go. They auto-regulate. They tend to go, out and regulate themselves, not within a relationship, but, with a substance, with a activity. So,
Or with other humans.
or with other people, but they aren't there to engage in a close emotional relationship the way someone who is preoccupied would like. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, I was giving a workshop once up in Canada to a large company, and it was on conflict and communication. And so I said to the people, all right, go to this side, get up and go to this side of the room. If your family never talked about issues, nobody said anything when they were upset. And the rest of you go to the other side of the room if your family just yelled it out and then hugged it out. And if you're somewhere in the middle, go. So this is just an example. It wasn't me talking about attachment styles. It was me talking about conflict styles. But it's the same kind of thing. And what I ended up saying to them, all right, stand up and look. Where are the people that you work with? If a person that's in the next cubicle to you is on the opposite wall to you and you have a difficulty, how do you think that's going to go? The one person doesn't want to talk about it at all, and the other person wants to really get into it, and they're not angry at you. They just want to solve it, and then they want to hug it out.
Right.
That's an example of how that works if you get into an intimate relationship with someone who's fine with or without you, prefer to be with you, but it's all good because they're quite whole and healthy within themselves, hooks up with somebody who has a great need to be needed and wanted and reassured, the dynamic is going to be in imbalance.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's interesting bringing up the difference between a conflict style and attachment style also. And yeah, at some point we'll have to talk more about that, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I think they're very related, and they
Mhm.
certainly integrate well when you talk about these things. But from an attachment point of view, sometimes you can become aware of what your attachment styles are. As you said, there's all kinds of things online you can take. But then when you reflect back on it, like with my background, for instance, I tend to have a dismissive, basic attachment style. And so knowing that about myself, and I learned that probably 30 years ago, but, maybe that long ago, we weren't talking about attachment styles then so much, but, I knew what was wrong. I knew what had happened to me. I knew how I felt about it. I had done all the work I needed to do. But that doesn't mean anything in the moment that somebody would say something like, well, I don't want to work with you anymore. Because the first thing that happens to us is we go back immediately to that early time. And then we have to remind ourselves all the way up that, oh, I've made different choices about this. It means something different. And you talk yourself out of it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's I like that. So just go back to my history. My mom was very she was probably a bit on the autistic spectrum. She was very detached from her feelings. So she didn't have the sensitivity to tune in to what her children were experiencing, which left us all hungry for and not validated. We weren't our feelings. She
Sure.
couldn't validate our feelings really because she didn't live in the world of feelings. Um, and that definitely, I think I was, into relationships very hungry to be fed. Partly because of that. My father also was really not that interested in his children. That wasn't very useful either. So I would tend to draw it earlier in my life, drew people to me who were they weren't interested in feeding me emotionally. So that
Yeah.
set up that dynamic. They'd be off doing their thing, and I'd be like, "Where are they?"
Yeah.
And it took a number of years to start unraveling that and learn how to create a different kind of relationship that's much more secure.
Yes, but you see, the good news in us sharing our stories is that we can tell you that by becoming aware and delving into it with the help of a professional is the way to shortcut the journey, um, allows you to say, I can be versatile. I can actually move toward a secure attachment style, because that's the ideal, of course, that we want to be secure within ourselves and secure within relationships.
Right.
But it's not that it ever leaves you what happened in your childhood, but you catch yourself up. You bring yourself up to date with what are you now? Who are you now? And what does this all mean to you? And how are you behaving? You're not that infant anymore that's like, feed me. And they say, what, you're crying? You're not that anymore. You can actually you have locomotive principles working for you when you're a baby. You can get up and walk out. You have
Right. Right.
possibilities. So it's really important. I want to remind the people who are joining us that you are very welcome to ask your questions or make your comments, and I will certainly bring them into the conversation. So please do that. We're so glad that you're here. And here's one that just came in. What do you call a person who is very empathetic but never felt validated or wanted by her family? When rejected, the person chases the other and clings to them.
Well, if we look at attachment, that is probably the ambivalent preoccupied. The preoccupied is the one who clings, tends to be more externally volatile. You tend to see the ups and downs more. And the empathetic part, is just a deal addresses sensitivity. It doesn't. I mean, you could be less empathetic and still have these different attachment styles. But when you're empathetic, you're very sensitive. So it may have actually affected you more than someone else.
Right. And let's just say something about empathy. Empathy is a good thing. And we all want to have some of it, but we all want to not overcompensate in the empathy field. So what Jennifer was just saying, like, it's good to be empathetic, but it's not good to be overly empathetic to the point where you are denying yourself in order to deal with someone else's preferences. So when you put the word empathetic in there, I think it's important for you to question, do I mean just healthily empathetic, like I'm interested in them and I can relate to them and I can kind of put myself in their shoes? Or are you overly empathetic, which means, what can I do for you? Oh, that's terrible. Let me cry with you. Let me run with you. Let me wail with you, which is identifying with the other person in an unhealthy way.
Right.
So hopefully that's helpful, and be sure to put things in there. Just let me tell everybody that in the programming here, when you put a comment in, it takes about 20 seconds for it to reach me. So just know that if you want to add other comments. So I think that was one well taken, because if you've never felt validated, this is a really important point. My friend Dr. Gary Salyer, in his book, he calls it welcomed by joy. If you weren't even welcomed by joy when you arrived in this world, that could be the beginning of a problem. Doesn't necessarily create awful problems, but maybe they got to like you quite quickly. But it's an indicator. It's a question to ask yourself. Was I wanted? Were they excited? Did they have me on purpose? Was I surprised? Was I a late life? Oops. What happened? And just notice, did that impact me? Did it get changed? Did that make a difference? That may be something that you could look at that would be helpful to you.
Right.
What are other things that people can look at without going off to look for an attachment style quiz, what else could they be asking themselves about what happened to them?
Well, if you feel it, well, you mean in the past or in the current? Like in the
In the
current,
past.
in the past. Okay, one thing I ask people is, so when you were little and you were upset, who soothed you and how did they do it? Or did you have to soothe yourself? Was there someone there to say, oh, I'm sorry you got hurt, you skinned your knee, let me make it better? Or were you just dismissed? I mean, like, what actually happened when something hurt or scared you? So really good to look at, how because people often have these vague ideas about how they were parented, but when you get into the specifics of what actually happened, then you may realize, oh, it wasn't the good childhood I thought it was. There's other stuff that was not happening that would have really been great if it had happened.
Yes, and I'll just add something to that because I have clients all over the world and that doesn't change culture to culture. It's really important for us to recognize that, in when we're looking at who soothed us or who took care of us or who was there for us, we're not looking to blame. But I find that when I'm working with these clients and somebody who has come to me in a dysfunctional relationship and I've got to know them for a while, a bit of a red flag to me, it sort of crosses my path, is when someone says, oh, I had a perfect childhood. And they're in a dysfunctional relationship that is not going well at all. And they may even be the perpetrator of the difficulties. And then they say, but I had a perfect childhood. My parents were perfect. It is a big red flag to me. How about you?
Absolutely. Whenever I hear perfect childhood, I'm like, okay, we've got some digging to do because clearly that isn't what happened. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes, and God bless the people who had a perfect childhood. I hope that you can describe that to all the rest of us. But things happen. People are ready to be parents. People aren't ready to be parents. People can't support you, maybe emotionally, maybe physically, maybe monetarily. I mean, people are having lives. It's not about good or bad or right or wrong. It just is. What
Mhm.
happened to you? What were the circumstances? How did this play out? How did it affect you? What did you take from that experience? How do you take that into your life now? So if you were not soothed by someone, what's that going to show up like in a relationship for you now?
Mhm. Right. So if you weren't soothed, you're going to be really well. You probably there's many possibilities. One is you learned how to soothe yourself. You sucked your thumb. You whatever you did. And so you may have this way of helping, self-soothing that doesn't involve connecting with other people. So you may have developed ways of soothing yourself, but it's not going to help you in your relationship because you don't know how to reach for your partner because you've never been taught that just didn't happen. You're not wired to do certain things.
Mhm.
It can also, create, great feelings of abandonment, or there's different things that could happen depending on, the exact situation, who you are. Yeah.
Well, let's also look at the reverse of that. Say you're an empathetic, healthily empathetic person, and something awful happens to your partner, and you want to go to them, you want to support them, you want to love them through it, and they withdraw.
Right.
They go off and like I had a partner once who said every time there was something wrong, he said, I prefer to go under the porch and just leave me alone.
Right.
So here's myself wanting to say, oh, I'm here to be with you, to nurture, to nourish, to be empathetic. And his background was, no, that's totally unacceptable. I handle this myself. And he called it going under the porch because when he was a little boy, there were so many awful things happening in his life that he actually physically went under the porch
Right.
where he felt nobody could see him, right?
Right. Yeah, and that it's horrible. I'm sure for you it was also very lonely because you want to be close to people when they need you, when they're vulnerable, when they're hurting. you don't want to just, well, okay, we've got two separate lives here. What are we doing together? So, and obviously for him, he didn't know how to do it differently.
He
So,
learned. I'm happy to tell you that he learned. But
yeah,
it was a surprise. So it's a good example for us to realize that when you get with somebody and they seem to reject your nurturing or reject your presence at times of need in their lives,
right,
that is related to attachment style. That's what they learned to do way back then, and they haven't found a good reason to change that. It took a few years before he felt safe with me,
right. Enough
that he
to,
could,
yeah,
yeah, that he could actually talk about it in depth. In the beginning, he had trouble articulating feelings.
right,
He felt them, but he didn't have language for them because no one had ever listened to them before, so
right,
he
right.
didn't have to articulate them.
And that's really, really common. It's really common where people can't give language to what they're feeling because they've never been helped with their feelings growing
Yeah.
up. Yeah,
Yeah, it's so important, and I want everybody to remember I'm talking to Jennifer Lara. I know you can see that on the screen, but you want to contact her, you can go to weconcile.com. It's right there on the screen. And if, of course, you want to talk to me, you know where to find me too. You find me at forrelationshiphelp.com because we're here to talk about these things and why we do these programs and why I bring guests on
right,
is so that you can have more insights. You can understand. That's what's going on. Oh, I never thought of that. I didn't know there were these things. And this is important for us to get some grounding in the things that are affecting us on a daily basis.
right. And then just going back to the comment that we discussed earlier, that person is clearly dealing with feeling abandoned. Abandonment issues and that really, abandonment has to be healed. Those issues have to be healed, and they're generally, you heal attachment issues in a relationship. So
Yes.
you get therapy with the partner who doesn't know how to validate you. You do something so that you can redo interactions in the moment with someone who's trained to help you redo them, because otherwise your abandonment increases your volatility to some degree, those feelings,
Mhm.
and then the partner pulls away, pushes, rejects you even more, and you're caught in this cycle that you actually need to stop, or nobody's going to get healed.
Yes, really good point. And that's the whole purpose of going to get help, having a third person who does this, and let me just give you a thought about this. A long time ago, when I was a single mom with 3 kids and working full time, I had 2 hours to myself every week for personal enjoyment. So I used to go to a bar where um, professionals gathered. And so it became really important for me to be able to mingle. And so people would say, hi, what's your sign and what do you do kind of thing. And if I said, well, I'm a psychologist by training, they would go, no, not on a Friday afternoon. So what I learned to say after I get into conversation with people is, maybe someone would say to me, what they do as an attorney. And I would say, well, before I tell you what I do, let me ask you, what kind of car do you have? And they'd say, oh, a BMW or something. And I'd say, so do you fix it yourself? Well, no. Well, do you just take it to the garage at the corner? No, I take it to the BMW dealer. Why? Because they know all about it. They study BMWs and it works really well and they can fix it in exactly the right way. I said, okay, ask me what I do. So they'd ask me and I'd say, I'm a life mechanic. I know exactly what it is that I can help you with. And that's where you bring your life when you can't fix it yourself because you know that you don't have the experience and the expertise.
Right.
So the things that we're talking about here are what wise and strong people do. They say, this isn't working. I'm not going to leave my BMW out in the carport to languish through the winter season. I'm actually going to take it to the BMW place. I'm going to get it tuned up and in top shape so I can enjoy the BMW. So if for any moment you've had a thought that, oh, I'm not going to go and work on my relationship, or I'm not going to go and work on myself, you're a languishing BMW in a wintertime carport. Not a good look. Not good
No,
for the BMW and not good for you.
right.
So we're talking about attachment styles. The things that happened to you before you had any choice. The things that you didn't make up, they happened to you and you decided what they meant. And you decided who you were as a result of what you decided what they meant or what people told you they meant. Now, these are things that can be very instructional, and you can grow through the experience of learning this and getting into a better situation to create a relationship with someone you care about. So, when someone comes to you and they say, I think we have a difficult, maybe they listen to this program and they said, Jennifer, I think you're right on. We seem to mismatch here. What would be the first thing you talk to them about?
Well, I would want, that's a good question. I would want, first of all, to I would want to know the cycle they're in, just to know who's doing what, just so I understand the dynamics. And once I understand the dynamics, I would want to get them down into understanding what their vulnerable needs are. So, when you're upset, or you're mad, you might be acting angry, mad, you didn't do this, but you actually might vulnerably want to say, I need to know that I'm important to you. And when that happened, I didn't feel important to you. So you want to get them to start finding a way to connect with not the surface symptom level of the problem, but the underneath vulnerable feelings that are based on attachment, which means based on feeling safe and secure. And once you start opening that up, and teaching them to listen to each other and tune to each other, you can start moving stuff around. And in part of opening that up is getting into what happened when you were little, because everybody has all these stories that are packed down in the basement, and they need to start coming up and speaking and becoming part of the conversation, or they come and it's like little children that they sabotage, they throw the hammer across the wall, or they have a temper tantrum, all these little feelings that have been locked away, all these little stories, and they need to be tended to because they're part of what's going on.
Yes, absolutely. So we have a comment here. Kelly says, I feel like I'm all of these styles: attached, detached, avoidant, entrenched, but never at the right time. How can I get more in sync with my partner when he can't or won't?
Well, first of all, I have to say that I've got all these styles too.
Don't we all?
Because they're on a continuum. So if you do the quiz, it might say you're 10% this, you're 40% this. It's not black and white. It's we do often have pieces of things. So I just want to throw that in.
Yes, and of course we are. Some days we're feeling very secure. Nothing has gone awry for 3 weeks. We're good. We can handle almost anything. Then the hammer gets thrown in, and all of a sudden we can't. And so it seems like we're in a different style. So that can also be the case. Or we're in a relationship that sort of matters as opposed to a relationship that really matters. We'll respond a little bit differently in those cases. So thank you for your question, Kelly. Tell us if that was satisfactory or if you have another question. And remember, it takes us 20 seconds to get your message after you push send. So this is important. But, I think Kelly brings up something when she says they're out of sync, the partners are out of sync. If I go back to my example, I wanted to comfort my partner. He wanted to go under the porch. We're out of sync. Sometimes in early days in that relationship, it was a long relationship, wonderful relationship. But you're safe with me. You don't have to go under the porch. It took a long time. And because of my being left and abandoned so frequently in every possible way as a child, under the porch seemed like, you're leaving?
It was an abandonment.
Yeah. So my child self would be like, well, what's wrong? Don't you trust me to comfort you? Don't you trust me with your feelings? But the actual fact was, He didn't trust him with his feelings. He didn't even have words for them. All he knew was, I hurt under the porch. It was as
Right.
basic as that, you know? And that's an important thing for us to notice, that not everybody is operating in any of these ways at a conscious level until we make them conscious and we bring them into practical ways of seeing what's going on in the relationship.
Mhm. I would also say, in terms of how can I get more in sync with my partner when he can't or won't? Well, first question is, are you able to be in sync with yourself? And one way, sometimes people need to take a time out, but that, that needs to be discussed because that can feel very abandoning. But the other thing that people can do is, if depending on where everyone's at, if you sit and face each other and make eye contact, or uh, touch hands, it can soothe our nervous systems. So it really depends on, what your capacity is in the moment, what your partner's capacity is in the moment. And do you have enough wherewithal? Because I didn't used to, I developed it, wherewithal to actually reach out and say, hold on, let's just sit together for a minute and let's calm down. And we don't have to talk about this quite yet, but let's just calm down
Yeah.
together and take care of each other.
Absolutely. But you see, this is growing maturity in the relationship.
Right.
To have two people who are even willing to do that sometimes is not the first line of what they choose to do. We have to become safe enough to even sit down and hold hands and maintain eye contact. For some people, that takes a lot of doing. It's not right or wrong or good or bad that you can't do it. It's that if it seems that that would be a good thing to learn how to do, then probably practice doing it, because it will reconnect you.
Right.
When you have a baby, I have 3 kids and a bunch of grandkids. So, you hold a baby and you hold it out in front of you, and you put it maybe on your knees, and there you are, eye contact to eye contact, and you're talking and you're laughing, and maybe you're holding their fingers and you're bonding. You're saying, I see you. You are my focus right now. You are very, very important.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very different experience than, oh, the kid's over in the crib.
Right. And what that, and that completely affects how you are in the moment and in the future. Yeah.
Yeah. So these are the things that we're talking about. And both of the people who made comments today have said, thank you. I'm glad that you were here and you enjoyed that. And I hope that we've woken you up to the fact that, oh, there are these things called attachment styles, and they're very, very useful for you to know that they exist, to allow yourself to have a little look at your beginnings and to see maybe where did I get my idea of if I am in a good place and if I'm welcome and if people will respond to my needs and my wants, and how do they do that? And if you'd like to get in contact with Jennifer, you'll find her at weconcile.com. So go over to her website. And if you'd like to connect with me, go to forrelationshiphelp.com. And of course, you're always welcome to come and listen to the podcast. There are, between my 2 podcasts, one I don't do anymore, but I do Save Your Sanity podcast, and you'll see it on that page. There's over 300 episodes there for you. So you can do a search on it. You can find something that interests you, and you can use it that way. Jennifer, thank you so much for spending this time with me.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. Yeah.
Jennifer is such a fountain of information about attachment styles. It's her focus, and you can talk to her. So go to weconcile.com. And I'm delighted that you came, and you know what I'm going to say, because I say it every time I do a podcast or a broadcast. Take very good care of yourself until we talk again, because you matter. Talk soon.